I'm going to just keep going. So the fundamental concern that we've got about this is really two main ones. One is about process, it's about how you make these decisions. And the second main concern is about, who owns the streets? Who are the streets for? So I'll talk about process first. Because we have an executive mayor sort of government in Tower Hamlets, effectively all decisions are made by the mayor, who is currently Mayor John Biggs. And he's got the ability to pretty much do whatever he wants. And I'm sure that's something we'll talk about in future weeks. But in terms of a process like this, where you are changing people's day-to-day lives, we think the council has to go through a much more careful and deliberative process in terms of making decisions like this. And they really need to bring the community along. And it is unfortunate about how divisive this has become. And I think if the council had been more careful and slower and more deliberative about doing this, then it would have been much better than the kind of quite sudden sort of dramatic changes that have been announced. But our main concern, as Puru has already said, is about issues like the equality impact assessment. And as a reminder, they're about protecting the most vulnerable people in our society, the elderly, the disabled, the people with protected characteristics. And we just don't think either that they've done some of the equality impact assessments, because we think they're missing in some cases, but where they have been done, they've been done badly. So, yeah, go ahead, Puri.
No, so following on from that, so Andrew and I and other councillors have had a discussion, and what we're proposing is to have a cross-panel investigation into the implementation of livable streets or low traffic neighbourhoods, because there was a petition to full council a few weeks ago where you had over 2,000 signatures of people making a serious allegation of discrimination in terms of the process. So what and the details will come through, and hopefully we'll have the details next week, is to go area by area, interval of say every month, go into one area and speak to residents and get your feeling as to why you feel aggrieved by the process, so to speak. And that's what it is. It's not about the principle. I think everybody wants lower pollution, everybody wants safer streets. But not at the cost of, say, civil liberties or human rights or vulnerable residents' needs being discriminated or violated. And that's what it is. We need a bit more fact on the ground as to what has happened and what is happening, so we can make better decisions. That's what it's about. But over to you, Andrew. I know you've got there's been a legal case in the High Court as well, which ruled against Mayor Sadiq Khan's low traffic neighbourhood scheme. But do you want to go through what you've had in terms of legal advice or just talking to people in the legal profession?
Yeah, so there are sort of two things to mention. So first of all, 2 weeks ago on the 20th of January, the Mayor of London and TfL lost a High Court case called about the Streetspace plan. And basically what they had proposed to do was to ban taxis from certain areas and make other changes. And the High Court judge basically found that those proposals, actually what had happened, they weren't proposals, actually been put in place, were illegal and have been quashed. And a kind of judge talked about a variety of issues. And we think a lot of what the judge said for TfL's plans are actually relevant to Tower Hamlets as well. And we've also had, we've had lots of emails about this subject from residents and social media. But one in particular was very striking, was from a barrister who was writing in a personal capacity. And that barrister basically thought that the Tower Hamlets Council hadn't met its public sector equality duty, and in particular hadn't done a good job in the equality impact assessments, because when that person read what had actually been published, they had a lot of questions, and they asked quite detailed legal type questions of Tower Hamlets Council and just didn't get satisfactory responses. So one of the things that we're following up on is the equality impact assessments to make sure that they were done. And we have an issue, Puru and I, about who's doing them, because we don't think the right people are doing them. We think they should be done centrally. But there is a risk that if this were to be challenged in court, and the problem is that costs money, that we think there's certainly a risk that Tower Hamlets Council would lose some of its decisions would be reversed by a High Court judge. And that's why we think these things have to be done more slowly to make sure they're also done legally at the same time.
Well, it's not free of charge. It's one of the only few items that Tower Hamlets Council is spending money on, given the background of cuts to services. I know there's a library campaign which affects your area, Blackwell and Cubic Town, but there's millions of pounds being spent potentially on an illegal program, which, if challenged in the court, will have to be reversed. And I know there was a article by the East End Inquirer where they took up I think Auto Trader, where they looked at some of the low traffic neighborhoods that had to be reversed or were reversed, and it costs money to reverse them as well. It's not something free of charge. So we're in this stage where we're spending money, millions of pounds potentially, for it to be undone by the courts, and then we'll have to spend money on that as well. So it just seems a bit bizarre rushing full head on, and that's why we want to do this set of hearings, potentially 4 hearings in areas throughout Tower Hamlets that have had an experience of the Liveable Streets consultation or are being implemented, starting in Wapping, then going over to either Bow or Bethnal Green, 2 separate hearings there, and then eventually coming down to Shadwell and Whitechapel, which has been quite contentious because I live in on the borders of Shadwell and Whitechapel, and it has become very contentious. I know my colleagues, the local Labour colleagues, the 3 councillors are under pressure from residents. There is an open letter that's being passed around. Last time I looked, nearly 700 residents have signed in the Whitechapel ward, and also in Shadwell, amongst the businesses, there's been a much discomfort where people haven't been consulted. These are businesses that provide fresh and cheap food for the area, and the proposals are going to have an impact on those businesses and potentially have an impact on what fresh, cheap food being provided for mainly deprived communities. Shadwell is not Kensington and Chelsea. Shadwell has high levels of child poverty, and one of the ways of tackling that is to have access to good quality, low-cost food.
Yeah, so just to follow up on the financial issues, I'm just looking at the council's annual capital programme for the next 3 years, and they're basically proposing to spend on public realm improvements and livable streets £23.8 million in the next 3 years. So we're not talking about a couple of £1 million. We're talking about the whole not the whole programme. Those parts of the programme which have been funded is adding up to £23 million. And from memory, there are parts of the Liveable Streets programme which have not yet got funding and which fall outside of those 3 years. So the total programme will be more than £23 million, because they've also spent approximately £1 million in the consultation process in previous years as well. So this is a lot of money. This is not just about equality impact. There is financial issues as well. Yeah.
Do you want to talk about the impact on emergency services? I know you had something came up on the private eye. I saw a video from Bethnal Green area, St. Peter's Ward, about an ambulance being stuck. But do you want to talk about that as well as concerns of residents, whether this has been thought through?
Yeah. So I'm going to read out directly from the words written in a letter. So basically a London paramedic who wanted to remain anonymous, but obviously the magazine has got that person's name, basically wrote a letter to Private Eye magazine because they knew they were campaigning on this issue about an experience of an emergency phone call. I'll just read it out. On a recent job, we were literally at the end of a street adjoining the road the cardiac arrest was on. Due to the barricade, we had to take an almost 5-minute detour around the side streets before we found our way to the address. 5 minutes probably doesn't seem too long. However, whoever came up with the idea of the barriers, but to a London ambulance service crew trying to get to a cardiac arrest patient with that first shock, it slashes our chances of a viable rescuation. In this case, the patient did not survive. We're not able to call attention to the issue because our internal problem reporting software only allows us to report equipment or personnel failures within the London Ambulance Service. There is no way for us to quantify the number of fatal delays caused by the council's arbitrary road closures, and no structure in place for us to report this. With a huge spike in COVID-related cardiac arrest calls we've seen in the past few months, these barricades are literally killing patients. Yeah. And that's the view of an ambulance paramedic.
Well, something to think about, and hopefully next Friday, me and Andrew will announce the full program, and we want to get your experiences, etc., about Liveable Streets, about the consultation, if you're in an area that has had it implemented, what the experience has been, etc., because we want to get to the facts, and that's important. We need more facts, we need more light, less heat, and let's get to the bottom of it. So we're going to go to a break, but